The new segregation and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Thank you for joining us for this podcast. It is called The New Segregation, and we have an incredibly dumbest bill in America. You just won't believe how intrusive it is into your personal life, to say the least. But first up, the new segregation, people segregating themselves willingly, intentionally. The University of Wisconsin, at least I believe that is the university that we're talking about, in the Daily Wire, it says the university hosts a, quote, welcome barbecue intended for people of color. Well, even that sounds kind of racist. They're woke, of course, but it's like a barbecue for people of color. It does sound like they don't really understand that there's, maybe a little bit of racist tinge to that, except that it's for people of color. In other words, if you're white and, you can't go, and if you're black, you can go, it's very odd. So in the Daily Wire, a welcome barbecue that is intended for self-identifying people of color. Well, there you go. So you could self-identify as a person of color if you're white, and then you could go to the barbecue. Oh, all right. I digress. Will be hosted next month at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Okay, so it was Wisconsin in Madison, though. The same university that had a racist boulder removed from campus this summer. According to a report from the College Fix's Jackson Walker, flyers posted at UW, University of Wisconsin, advertising the event read, quote, all are welcome, intended for self-identifying people of color. What is a self-identifying person of color? I just guess it just means that you feel like, you have a lot of blackness in you, and therefore, even if you're white, you can potentially go. But imagine putting something so stupid in a university. Remember, the university is all about, we don't discriminate, and we believe in, that we're going to treat everybody the same and so forth. And then you get there and like, well, we have a barbecue, but it's only if you're black. The, quote, welcome barbecue will reportedly be hosted by the school's Center for Cultural Enrichment, where Center for Cultural Enrichment. Oh my God. These are such euphemisms. I mean, like Soviet euphemisms, where their stated mission includes embracing all races, ethnicities, sexual orientations, gender expressions, religions, classes, abilities, or any other aspect of identity we hold, according to the report. So, Walker noted that the event is advertised on campus in several dining hall locations, but curiously, the barbecue is not listed on the campus events calendar, nor the university housing events and activities page. In contrast, a Latinx new student welcome is posted online. Latinx, right? Because you can't be like a Latino, you have to be a Latinx. UW-Madison spokesman Meredith McGlone told the College Fix it is standard practice for housing to use signs rather than online listings. Regarding event promotion, it is standard practice for housing to use signs rather than online listings to promote events organized within the hall intended primarily for hall residents, McGlone said via email. The Latinx student welcome is not organized by housing and is targeted to a broader audience, which is why it's promoted online. Earlier this month, you'll love this, podcast listeners. At the same university, earlier this month, a large boulder was removed from the campus after the Black Student Union and other racial justice activists complained about it being a racist monument. So there's a racist rock. The rock was allegedly tainted with racism since a journalist once used a racist term to describe the large boulder during the 1920s. The rock's existence had apparently been oppressing students ever since. So they want to get rid of the racist rock, and they did. But they want to segregate a barbecue. I mean, this is at the same university. This is what we call education in the United States of America in the 21st century. I mean, talk about back to the future. It's just unbelievable. And so this podcast that's called The New Segregation, and that's an example of the new segregation. But I have a number of others because the new segregation is far and broad and getting broader in its scope, and it's kind of scary. Before we even go to vaccine segregation, we're going to go into segregation, talk about the segregation that people are posting online willingly. Okay. So a friend of mine who lives here in the People's Republic of Maryland sent me a text, and she screenshot something that someone posted on a social media site. It was Facebook. Okay. And the lady's name is Sarah Burrell. And I'll send it to Chris and maybe he can post it up if he has time. Sarah Burrell. So this is her Facebook page, and she posts the following. Primary care physician looking for a Black primary care general practitioner in the town of Waldorf or La Plata. Any suggestions? Now, I guess I probably should have gone on that actual lineage of newsfeed, I should say, and find out what people were suggesting, to see if there was any pushback. But I don't know. But nonetheless, Sarah Burrell, primary care physician looking for a Black primary care general practitioner. So that is self-segregation, folks. That is the new segregation. And that new segregation is very dangerous because she's not saying, I'm looking for the best primary care general practitioner in my town. She's not interested in the best, whether the best is Black or white or Latino or Asian. She's not interested in the best, irrespective of race. She's interested in race first. And it might be someone who's awful and has like a million lawsuits against them from malpractice and is generally considered an awful physician, but she doesn't care because she's going to judge the physician that she hires based on the color of their skin. And then Jason Henry, also on Facebook, posted, and this was sent to, these Facebook posts were sent to me by a friend, and this is happening all over social media. Jason Henry says, was looking for recommendations, looking for a minority plumber company in Charles County, looking for a minority plumber company in Charles County. So let's just say the same thing applies there. You hire a plumber, and there's the question, right? So you hire a plumber, the plumber's Black because Jason Henry is Black. I mean, it has his photo on social media, or certainly appears to be Black. And Jason Henry hires the plumber, and the plumber does a terrible job and puts in really cheap piping, the inappropriate size of piping, clearly was in the business of ripping off Jason Henry. And then what does Jason Henry do? Does he then put out a new post and say, looking for recommendations for a new minority plumber to fix what the old minority plumber did? And podcast listeners, please, especially you liberals who love listening to my podcast, and we know that you are out there, please don't say that I'm suggesting in any way, because I'm not, that because of the color of someone's skin that they're going to do a bad job. No, that's the whole point of this podcast, is that there are some who are saying, I want to hire someone based on the color of their skin because of the fact that I think they're going to do a good job and I don't want to hire those white people. Ridiculous. This is all over Facebook. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call the new segregation in America. We work so hard as a country to get rid of the Democrat-imposed Jim Crow laws, right? The Jim Crow laws were imposed by Democrats. Yes, Democrats, primarily in the South. And we got rid of those laws, took many years to get rid of them. And now, who is imposing the new segregation? Democrats. I mean, because that's how they have maintained their power in America. It's not because of their ideas, because their ideas are bankrupt. It's because they maintain power through dividing people. Case in point, COVID vaccine segregation. This is also part of the new segregation. So if you don't get a COVID vaccine, You have to be segregated or separated from your job, or separated from the rest of society, not allowed to work, not allowed to travel, not allowed to go into a restaurant. Jimmy Kimmel thinks even worse. So Jimmy Kimmel, who is allegedly a comedian, he's not a comedian, by the way, because all of his jokes are about trying to crush the Republican Party and trying to crush diversity of thought. He has no jokes outside of political jokes. And he has no jokes that aren't jokes that he only has jokes that make fun of the Republican Party. There's no other way of putting it. And after a while, it becomes kind of sickening because you realize that he has kind of a mental health issue. And certainly, the networks are telling him these are the kind of jokes we want to hear. We don't want to hear any other jokes because, let's face it, what makes comedy fun is when you make fun of both sides and you call out both sides in a satirical way. That is really what makes, not Jimmy Kimmel. So on Tuesday of this week, he made the suggestion that anyone that did not get vaccinated against coronavirus should be turned away from a hospital so that they can go die. That's literally what he said. So you didn't get vaccinated and you're sick and you're showing up at my hospital, you need to go die. We're not going to let you in. Can you imagine? Folks, that's segregation. And the great irony with Jimmy Kimmel's so-called funny joke, that was supposed to be funny. The great irony with his joke is that many people in the Black community don't trust the vaccine for a variety of reasons. And rather than go into what all those reasons are, because you've heard them ad nauseum from so many other podcasts, and you've also heard them certainly on, news channels and Fox News and so forth. The fact of the matter is, it is your body and you should be able to decide whether or not you put this vaccine inside of your body and whether or not you believe you need it based on your own unique health considerations. And doesn't matter to Jimmy Kimmel. He wants you to be segregated. Don't believe me? Well, listen to this. We're not only going to play the clip, but at the end of the clip, his audience is actually laughing. They think this is funny. That's fun. Isn't that funny? The unvaccinated are being turned away and they have to go die. This is what is considered humor on network television now. It's absolutely sick. Here's the clip.
I hope you had a relaxing Labor Day. It was not a fun Labor Day weekend COVID-wise. The number of new cases is up more than 300% from a year ago. Dr. Fauci said that if hospitals get any more overcrowded, they're going to have to make some very tough choices about who gets an ICU bed. That choice doesn't seem so tough to me. Vaccinated person having a heart attack? Yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo? Rest in peace, Wheezy.
Isn't that incredible? You hear the audience like, woohoo, yeah. The guy that won't get vaccinated, yeah, he gets to die. Woohoo. I mean, it shows you, and I've said this before, there's a cloak of evil that has spread across America and perhaps even across the world, but certainly across America. And that cloak of evil includes people like Jimmy Kimmel, who think that part of comedy includes wishing that people die and segregating them, no matter who they are. I mean, a true American, someone who is truly a statesperson and a comedian, will make fun of perhaps the elected leaders for giving so much conflicting information about COVID. And that would include Fauci and Biden and probably Trump as well, let's face it. There was a lot of information that was conflicting and continues to be so. But instead, if you're on the Democrat side, you just wish your opponents to die. That's Jim. So Jennifer Horn on Twitter said, so disgusting. For someone who benefited from compassionate care when his son was sick, it sure seems like he has lost that for anyone else who is suffering. Because Jimmy Kimmel's son was very ill some time ago. Carmine Sabia also tweeted, I'm fully vaccinated, but what I have noticed is that the pandemic has allowed liberals to say what they really want. They want conservatives to die. Jimmy Kimmel and the others do not care about your vaccinated status. They want you dead. And then Joseph R. Juvenal tweeted, "For most celebrities, this would be enough to get them canceled. Do you deny medicine to smokers? Do you deny medicine to obese people? Jimmy Kimmel's callous stupidity should get him fired." Well, certainly, I think I don't want to see Jimmy Kimmel canceled because then that makes us just like them. So I'm not part of that cancel culture idea, but I do feel like what should happen is that the network should ask him to apologize and actually start telling and giving real jokes and real humor, not jokes that have in them as part of the joke. Isn't it funny that, like 50 million people died because when they went to the hospital, we wouldn't treat them? Isn't that really funny? And they were all like conservatives and so forth. I mean, that's really what we're dealing with. And this is, part of the whole new segregation, the new segregation by campus wokeness and the new segregation by COVID vaccines versus folks that don't want to get the COVID vaccine. Jen Psaki agrees with the COVID vaccine segregation. Can you believe that? Jen Psaki, the president's press spokesman, the front person that's out there. And oh, by the way, I just saw a recent picture. It's a meme out there of Jen Psaki, and it was like Chucky with red hair. So I thought it was pretty funny. But Jen Psaki, President Biden's spokesperson, said the new COVID plan will impact daily life. Depends on if you're vaccinated or not. So, if you're vaccinated, your life will be fine. If you're unvaccinated, it won't be fine. Really? Well, if that were true, then why is it that people who are vaccinated can still get COVID and still have to wear a mask? So their lives, in some cases, their lives have been better because obviously if you're 80 years old or 70 years old, you have a comorbidity, I think the vaccine certainly makes sense. And I mean that sincerely. But there are plenty of people who have COVID who don't want to be vaccinated because they were able to fight it with no problem. And so they are asking themselves the question, why do I need this vaccine? Well, apparently, according to Biden, we're going to segregate people. Even if you are a really healthy individual and you had COVID already, which means you have the COVID antibodies and you decide not to get vaccinated because of that, you will be segregated because this is the new Democrat Party. Don't take my word for it. Here is Jen Psaki. Here it is.
Any of those new steps influence the average American's day-to-day life? Should we expect any new mitigation recommendations, as an example?
It depends on if you're vaccinated or not. Go ahead.
It's possible that there's something new.
There are six steps the president's announcing. There will be new components, as I noted and you noted. Some of that will be related to access to testing. Some will be related to mandates. Some will be related to how we ensure kids are protected in schools. And we'll preview more tomorrow as all the pieces are finalized. But there will be new components that sure will, of course, impact people across the country. But we're also all working together to get the virus under control, to return to our normal lives. And I know many people, I'm sure, are looking forward to hearing what the president has to say.
So that is Jen Psaki. She's referring to the fact that the president of the United States today is going to have a press conference and he's going to talk about COVID because, of course, he is pivoting away from Afghanistan and he's now pivoted towards COVID and he wants to talk about new ways to fight COVID. But of course, if you're a Democrat, the way you do it is in a Stalinist manner. And you do it by segregating people. And you heard it from her own mouth, Jen Psaki. Well, what we're going to do in the White House to fight COVID and how it affects you out there, you little peon Americans, you deplorables, depends on whether you're vaccinated. Can you believe that? So I think you should probably expect today that Biden is going to implement a federal vaccine mandate. And that it's likely to be announced today by Biden. And that would be a mandate for any federal employees, any and all federal employees. Can you imagine? I mean, this is the new Democrat Party. And this is the same party that wanted, under Barack Obama and Joe Biden, to implement socialized medicine and a one-payer system whereby everybody had the same insurance. And that same insurance was paid for by the federal government. And the customer wasn't you, the patient. The customer was the federal government, because since they're the ones paying you, And imagine the kind of power the federal government would have if we had fully implemented 100% socialized medicine with no outs for anyone, no way of getting private health insurance, no way of going to any kind of alternative other than that one size fits all. Well, we see it now with segregation, vaccine segregation. This is what COVID is in part about, I believe, namely, at least the Democrats are using COVID to do this, and that is to implement socialized medicine and tell everybody it's our way or the highway. You want to work, you better get vaccinated. And if you don't get vaccinated, well, according to Jimmy Kimmel, we hope you die. We're going to deny you access to health care. We're going to deny you access to the hospital. By the way, this is happening, not at hospitals. It's happening when you go to a specialist, a doctor specialist, and the doctor specialist is saying, hey, are you vaccinated? Well, then I'm not really sure I can perform that minor surgery that you want. You need rotator cuff surgery. Do you need, minor surgery that would make your life more comfortable? Well, we're not going to do that to get vaccinated because we don't really want you in the hospital because you're the real problem. You're the real problem. And that really is a danger in America, this new segregation. And so next up, podcast listeners, we have rigging the election in California. Rigging the election in California. So we've talked about this a little in the past where Gavin Newsom has paid off voters in advance of the recall, and that has been confirmed. Namely, that Gavin Newsom implemented additional supplemental payments to the people of California. 79% of the people in California are going to get these payments. They're going to get them right before the recall election on September 14th. I mean, talk about, no wonder Republicans can't win because how do you fight that, right? If you're conservative and you believe in fiscal responsibility, you would never do such a thing. First of all, it should be illegal, right? It should be prohibited. But if you're a Democrat, you don't care, man. You just pay people to vote for you. It's very simple. But there's another new thing in California that they're implementing, and it's rigging the election. And that is this. There was a lawsuit in California about what was going to be allowed on these cards that are sent to you, the voter information guides. So again, recall elections can be confusing for many voters, especially low information voters. And in California, they have a voter information guide. So the voter information guide is mailed out to every Californian, and it tells you how you vote to recall someone or how the recall works. Okay, that's the purpose of the voter information guide. It's not necessarily the ballot. It's a guide of how this process works. Well, there was a lawsuit in California, and there was a significant win for Gavin Newsom because a Sacramento Superior Court judge, Laurie Earle, has tentatively ruled, and at this point it's probably too late because she's ruled, that Newsom can refer to the recall in the state's official voter information guide as follows. So once again, there was a lawsuit, and Superior Court Judge Laurie Earle said, yeah, well, you know what? Gavin Newsom can, as governor, put in the voter information guide the following statement. You won't believe this. Quote, an attempt by national Republicans and Trump supporters to force an election and grab power in California, end quote. In other words, the voter information guide will include that statement that one of the reasons for the recall is because there's an attempt by national Republicans and Trump supporters to force an election and grab power in California. The ruling also permits Newsom to accuse Republicans of abusing our recall laws through the mechanism that is enshrined in California's Constitution. Well, here's the problem. There are tons of independents and Democrats in California who also support this recall election. So it's not some sort of Republican revenge thing. And moreover, in a voter information guide, the Board of Elections is responsible for sending information out to the voters on how to vote in a way that your vote counts and what this election allows you to vote and how long voting is and how to go about. I mean, basically the mechanics of voting. But instead, in California, they use the voter information guide as more Democrat propaganda. I mean, folks, how can this be allowed in the United States of America? The purpose, how can the state weigh in on who they want to win? So this is just messed up. And this came from Cal Matters magazine. And it's a magazine that gives you all the information about the bills that are happening in California and so forth. And this is a real thing. It's unbelievable. So how could Larry Elder, the front runner, who's a Republican, in this recall election even have a chance of winning? I mean, how do you have a chance of winning if you're Larry Elder? And speaking of Larry Elder, well, good old Larry Elder. He was making a tour. He was touring. And obviously because he's trying to mine for votes. And he was egged by a woman. That is to say, she threw eggs at him. And she was wearing a gorilla mask, only in California, right? Because you don't want to be recognized when you do bad things in California. So just like, in Seattle and Portland, where everybody wore masks, Antifa wore masks, it shows you, right? They know what they're doing is wrong. So they put masks on because they can't have a real conversation with you. Because if they were to have a real conversation with you, they would lose every single day of the year because they can't speak intelligently about anything. So they just throw eggs at you, or they break the windows in your store, or they loot your store. Well, Larry Elder was egged by a woman who was wearing a gorilla mask in a racist attack in California. He was physically assaulted as well. So critics are lambasting the woman who was seen on camera wearing a gorilla mask while throwing an egg at California gubernatorial candidate Larry Elder as he toured a homeless encampment in Los Angeles. Quote, a blatant racist wearing a gorilla mask attacked Larry Elder. Now keep in mind, podcast listeners, Larry Elder is black. And here you have a leftist, an operative of Gavin Newsom's campaign, wearing a gorilla mask. Can you imagine? Again, Larry Elder is black. He's a Republican. He's running on a number of things in California, not the least of which is to provide school choice to black kids who are poor. And here you have a woman wearing a gorilla mask making fun of Larry Elder. It's just disgusting. This is the left. A blatant racist wearing a gorilla mask. This is what Jeffrey A. Dove Jr. tweeted. A blatant racist wearing a gorilla mask attacked Larry Elder. These people are completely unhinged. Thanks to the LA Times with all of your negative reporting. Look what you have done. And someone else, Matt Gorman. If someone in a gorilla costume threw an egg at a black Democrat candidate, every GOPer in the country would be getting asked to comment. That's a fact, right? Travis tweeted, is anyone surprised to see white Democrats throwing eggs and attacking a black man trying to help his community? Would be nice to see some consequences, but I doubt it. Dan Crenshaw, Congressman Dan Crenshaw tweeted, California, this election may go down in history as the moment where the long, slow decline of a great state finally stopped. Please get out and vote yes on recall and vote for Larry Elder. And then Benny tweeted, same energy, different era. And he had a picture of the lady wearing a monkey, an ape, costume or an ape mask, throwing an egg at Larry Elder. And the other part of the screen were angry people angry Democrats, by the way, from the Deep South trying to stop segregation. Trying to stop desegregation, excuse me. And then Richard Grinnell, of course, an official in the Trump administration, tweeted, that's all you say about this violence? It was more than a flying egg. These left-wing racists were attacking a black man running for governor. Why is Spectrum One dismissing racist attacks? Well, in any event, you get the picture. We had that clip, and it's primarily just background noise and people yelling slurs at Larry Elder and so forth. And of course, all he's trying to do is campaign. But this is the new left, right? This is who they are. They can't have conversations. That's what Antifa did all through 2020 during the election. And it continues in California when they are really, truly challenged. We have that clip, and here it is.
Hands off me, motherfucker. Touch me again. Don't touch me again. Don't touch her, motherfucker. I'll pop him in the motherfucker nose. I'll fuck you up, motherfucker. What you do? You hear me? Grab her ass, motherfucker. You're the steppy boy. Maria, rip your head.
So what you hear there are a bunch of people trying to hit not just the candidate, but also hit him, physically hit him, physically hit the candidate, physically hit the people helping the candidate, surrounding the candidate, the security people, his aides and so forth, throwing eggs, yelling at him because they're the left and they're just triggered. Oh my gosh, they're not used to having diversity of thought in that part of California. Diversity of thought frightens them as it frightens everybody that's on the left. And that's why Gavin Newsom has decided to send out these nuts. And that's why Gavin Newsom is trying to pay off the voters by giving them stimulus checks from California just in advance. And that's why he's trying to rig the election when the voter information guide comes out by saying, it's Trump. He's the one that's trying to do this. Meanwhile, it's a black Republican who grew up poor and in Los Angeles is one of the top, if not the top, radio personalities in California, a conservative pundit, and wants nothing more than to promote school choice for minority children, something that would be game-changing in this declining state of California. And all I can say is, Californians, if you're listening, I know that we do have Californians listening, please know this, that on the opposite side of the country, the state of Maryland, we're just like you. We're run by the same nuts, the same crazy people in the legislature that run your legislature. And we definitely feel your pain. We want school choice too. You want school choice. And I hope you guys break this cycle in California. I really do. I hope you break this cycle of the crazies who are in charge. And we will talk more about that, by the way, with the dumbest bill in America later in this podcast, because that's also from California and you won't believe it. It'll show you how out of control California really, truly is. So next up, podcast listeners, the GOP House candidates who ran in 2020 but didn't win are running again in 2022. So a bunch of GOP candidates who ran for the House in 2020 came very close to winning. Now, as you recall, many of those races, they kept counting many, many weeks after the election, in some cases months, which, by the way, that in and of itself demonstrates to you why people should be required to vote in person. Because if you have to keep counting until you finally get the result that you want, well, there's probably some shenanigans going on, because in the 21st century, you should know immediately who wins. The polls close. Within an hour, you should know exactly who won. Should be that easy, right? Because, we got technology and so forth, and should be pretty straightforward. I mean, that's what they do in Florida. In Florida, they are able to figure it out within like an hour or so after the polls close. Well, the GOP candidates who ran in 2020 are going to run again in 2022, and they're calling it round 2. So Republican Matt Mowers made it official this week, launching his second bid for the United States House of Representatives in one of the premier congressional battleground districts in the country. Quote, I'm announcing with all of you here tonight that we're going to finish the job we started last year, Mowers declared Wednesday, as he kicked off his campaign at a launch event in Manchester, New Hampshire. The former executive director of the state GOP and veteran of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, who later served as a State Department official during the Trump administration, came within 5 points of defeating Democrat Representative Chris Pappas last November in New Hampshire's 1st congressional district. Mowers, who joins a growing primary field in the race for GOP nomination, says running once and coming close to victory will benefit him as he makes a second bid for Congress. Same thing happens across the country. You go in and you read this article, and Republican after Republican across the country, in California, in New Hampshire, in the South, in the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, these are people that have come very, very close to winning in 2020. And I don't know about you podcast listeners, but It sure seems to me that there were a lot of shenanigans that happened in those House races because remember in New York, I think there were 2 races that took them quite some time to call. And one in particular, it took them like months, a couple of months to call. And ultimately the Republican won. But it came down to absentee ballots. And that is the problem, right? If you can't count absentee ballots as they are cast, if you can't do that, and you can't do it in a really super timely way, like count them that day, then you shouldn't be having absentee ballots. It's really very simple. They're able to do that in Florida. You know, Florida has an absentee ballot program, but they count the absentee ballots as they come in. But you shouldn't have absentee ballots the day of the election. That is room for mischief. And everybody knows it because then it's like, well, then the question becomes, well, when did those absentee ballots actually come in? When did they arrive in time? Or were they cast somewhere out there, you know, far away and then just happened to show up because we knew it was going to be a close election? It's why it makes so much sense to properly adjudicate what happened in 2020 and make sure it never happens again. And I'm glad that all of these Republicans who lost but were in close races are going to run again, because I do believe that as each passing month happens, people are going to realize that they made a huge mistake with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who's, by the way, even worse than Joe Biden. Speaking of Joe Biden, Biden has been found stuffing anomalies into his $3.5 trillion bill. They're quietly slipping liberal perks into the package. They're not liberal perks, by the way. They're Marxist perks. They're progressive perks. It's nuts. And I'm just going to read off some of this because this is important. There's a $3.5 trillion bill. It's in the United States Congress. And the primary individual that's stopping this bill from moving forward is Joe Manchin. Okay? He's the guy. Well, Biden and the lefties, the Obama lefties that are truly running the Biden administration, here's what they want. Here's what's in the bill as we speak. Okay? Listen to this, podcast listeners. It's a $3.5 trillion budget resolution. It's been under the microscope for weeks, for good reason, so that people can read it, because, you know, sometimes you got to read it before you pass it, unlike Nancy Pelosi. There's a civilian climate corps. So we've talked about this before in Mark and the Millennials. So in other words, a bunch of climate zombies are going to be paid by the government to knock on your door and to tell you to stop using leaf blowers or stop cutting your lawn. There's an ACA extension. So in other words, Obamacare expansion and extension, and filling the Medicaid coverage gap. In other words, they want socialized medicine. There's health equity, maternal, behavioral, and racial justice. What? Racial justice. Okay. State and local tax deduction relief, which benefits the blue states, especially the wealthy blue states like New York and California and Connecticut, right? The states that overspend, that were wholly unprepared for COVID, that have been so mismanaged during COVID and mismanaged for decades. Well, they're going to get more money because, you know, if you're a Democrat, you got to give more money to the people that can't govern properly. Electrifying the federal vehicle fleet. So they want all the USPS little Jeepy things that they drive around delivering your mail. They want those to be electric, as well as the non-USPS fleet to be electric. They want lawful permanent status for immigrants or amnesty for illegal aliens. So they want to give permanent lawful status to all illegal immigrants, or amnesty. So all the people that are crossing the border illegally are still here illegally. And Biden has broken every law that you can possibly imagine with our immigration system. And then now, in this $3.5 trillion bill, wants to do what? He wants to give them amnesty because he wants voters. The bill defines gender identity as a protected class. Oh my God. So the bill would define gender identity as a protected class. So if you decide that you want to be a different gender, or you want to be called they or their, that kind of thing, it would be a protected class. In other words, you could get sued for calling a guy a guy. I mean, or a girl or girl. Absurd. Doles out digital equity grants partly based on racial or ethnic minority status. State mandated carbon reduction program, so it requires that. I mean, the ultimate overreach of this bill. The bill contains the word equity 64 times, which of course is the Marxist term that Democrats love. The bill provides roughly $2.5 billion to help the United States government expand the border processing stations used by migrants from poor Central American nations and other regions around the world. In other words, they want to expedite it's like that it's not good enough. They want more people there, not to stop you from coming in. They want more people to expedite your ability to come in so they can flip the United States from a republic to a Marxist society where Democrats are in control forever because of equity. And, we've talked about this before on Mark and the Millennials. This $3.5 trillion bill is representative of why the Convention of States organization is so important. And I'm going to do a huge shout out to the Convention of States organization. Please go online and sign up for the Convention of States alerts and newsletters. And please sign up to be part of the Convention of States, because the Convention of States calls for an Article 5 convention of the states in the United States Constitution that allows there to be modifications to the United States Constitution. And one of those modifications that relates directly to this $3.5 trillion bill, okay, would be that you can no longer have $3.5 trillion bills that include 1,000 different subject matters. The Convention of States wants bills such as this to be put into subject matter bills. So in other words, if you want to have a civilian climate corps, that would be an environmental bill. And that environmental bill would have to be its own separate bill, which might only be like 10 or 15 or 20 pages. But then at least you can read it and understand what it is. And there would have to be an up or down vote on that bill. If you wanted an expansion of Obamacare, that would be a separate bill because that deals with healthcare. It is a different subject matter. And since it is a different subject matter, it should most definitely have its own bill. When you're dealing with taxation, like eliminating the SALT taxes that were implemented by the Trump administration and the Republican Congress, that deals with taxation. That is a subject matter that should be in its own bill. If you're going to deal with electric vehicles, that is a subject matter that deals with transportation. That should be, well, guess what? The Convention of States believes that that is one thing that should be changed in the United States Constitution. Namely, the congressmen and senators should not be able to vote on bills that are hundreds, if not, thousands of pages long, that deal with a multitude of subjects, if not hundreds of different subjects. Because we're not able as human beings to properly read these bills independently and judge them accordingly. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And so I ask you, all of you listeners, if you really love this country and you really want to save this country, then please sign up now and join the Convention of States, which seeks to save this country by modifying the United States Constitution, among other things, term limits, but also single subject bills in the United States Congress, where you don't have these massive bills and people are required once and for all to be held accountable for their vote, including the vote on some of these really crazy ideas that are hidden in massive bills that no one ever knows about or sees, because we have a fundamentally dishonest media that will never tell you anyway. But at least if we had these individual bills, you could find them and read them and they would be understandable. Instead of saying, well, where do I find that thing in there that deals with, the fact that everybody's got to drive an electric vehicle? Oh, well, that's in that $3.5 trillion, 10,000 page bill. Well, how do I know it's in there? I mean, I don't have the time to read that. Should be done the right way. Congress is out of control, Our federal government's out of control. The elected officials are out of control on both sides of the aisle. They haven't tried to fix this problem. They've just made it worse. And the spending problem keeps getting worse. It needs to stop. Please join the Convention of States. Next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And it is the dumbest bill in America. And it is, you won't believe it, establishing the California Condom Police. You heard that correctly, I'm sad to say. The dumbest bill in America. This episode is establishing the California Condom Police. Sponsored by Democrat Assembly member Cristina Garcia. Of course, it's from California. She's from California. She does identify as a woman, by the way. There's no doubt about that, and you'll hear more about that shortly. Well, the sponsor is advocating for this idea that there should be, I guess, a condom police, when you're in the act of making love with your significant other, that basically California is going to get in the middle and decide. So I'm going to have to read what this bill does first so that you can fully understand. So in USA Today, California moves to be the first state to outlaw stealthing or removing a condom during sex. Apparently that's a thing, stealthing. Now, imagine that your state legislature decides to get involved in this, right? Talk about getting involved in your bedroom. California moves to be the first state to outlaw stealthing or removing a condom. California lawmakers moved to make the state the first to outlaw stealthing, which is removing a condom without permission during intercourse. Legislators sent Governor Gavin Newsom a bill on Tuesday, adding that the act to the state's civil definition of sexual battery. It makes it illegal to remove the condom without obtaining verbal consent. But it doesn't change the criminal code. Instead, it would amend the civil code so that a victim could sue the perpetrator for damages, including punitive damages. Democrat Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia has been pushing for the legislation since 2017, when a Yale University study said acts of stealthing were increasing against both women and gay men. Her original bill attempted to make it a crime. But legislative analysts said at the time that the act could already be considered a misdemeanor or sexual battery, even if it isn't specifically referenced in the criminal code. But the analysts said it is rarely prosecuted, if only because of the difficulty in proving that a perpetrator acted intentionally instead of accidentally. So let's read that again. So this is really the crux of the bill, right? So the legislative analysts in California, these are the civil servants who have to explain to you what the bill does, and many times provide you background about existing legislation that might conflict with that bill, or what this legislation would ultimately do, and some consequences. Sometimes they write that. They try to stay, usually the civil servants try to stay out of the political side of it. But these particular civil servants in California, when trying to explain the bill, said, well, the analysts, they said this kind of activity is rarely prosecuted because it's difficult to prove that the perpetrator actually intentionally removed their condom. So how do you, so can you imagine, podcast listeners, you're a judge and you're in a court and this case comes before you and you got, a plaintiff and a defendant, and the plaintiff is suing the defendant for $1 million because the defendant allegedly took off his condom. And the plaintiff says, he took it off. The judge is like, well, how do you know he took it off? This is why the bill is so stupid, of course, among other things, because it's California establishing the California Condom Police and getting between you and someone else in the privacy of your home. And it's just absurd. Well, don't take my word for it. The sponsor is a nut anyway. The sponsor in the past, it's a few years ago, had a bill to end the tax on tampons. So obviously you can tell this sponsor is hyper interested in people's private parts. I mean, I'm just going to say this sponsor is Democrat Assembly member Cristina Garcia. So this bill, of course, is now on Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. It's the California Condom Police, but she had a previous bill to end the tax on tampons. So she's obviously very interested in your private parts, probably more so. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Well, we have a clip on that, and here it is.
We've been taught not to talk about our periods. We've been taught to hide it. We've been taught that it's shameful. This is just biology. It's something that happens every month on a regular basis. It's something a lot of us deal with for 40 years of our lives. And so it's time we come out of the shadows and we end this tax on tampons.
So just a few years ago, she was, advocating for, the civil rights issue of our time, getting rid of the tax on tampons. I mean, she's hyper into, because that was Assemblywoman Garcia, she's hyper into your private parts. And, according to the news, this is just one more step towards gender equity. We have a second clip about this tampon tax, which tells you a lot about who this Assemblywoman is. And this, of course, we're going to talk about the tampon tax in a minute. Anyway, here's the clip.
I'm doing this because I'm tired of being taxed for being a woman.
Garcia is pushing Assembly Bill 1561, a bipartisan effort to end the tax on tampons and take one more step towards gender equity.
What we're trying to do is make sure that our tax code is gender neutral. And so we're trying to eliminate the tax on all menstrual products, pads, tampons, cups, and sponges. And so it's the only product of its sort in our tax code that's specific to a gender, and we get taxed every month for 40 years of our lives for being women.
So she sounds like she's kind of an angry person, just saying, and she's hyper focused at the same time on, as I said, people's private parts, because there she is there. You just heard her advocating for her no tampon tax. And then now she's advocating for the California Condom Police. So I see a trend here in Assemblywoman Garcia's moves, right? So don't take my word for it. I have more proof about how obsessed she is with your private parts. Here's Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia and the news media talking about how she had multiple sexual harassment charges against her by men. Okay, so talk about someone who is not just hyper-focused on her policy decisions on private parts, but also she's hyper-focused in the workplace as well. We have that clip. You won't believe it. Here it is.
A man who worked as a field rep for Assemblywoman Garcia back in 2014, now filing a new harassment complaints against her. In it, the former employee says Garcia fired him after he turned down her request to play a high school kissing game at a fundraiser.
And he's on the floor. She's sitting next to him with a bottle in her hand, and she makes a comment they should be playing Spin the Bottle.
Attorney Dan Gillian says his client refused to play Spin the Bottle with his then boss, Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia, but claims he paid a price.
That's when he felt as though his days were numbered and that he was being targeted.
Was he being targeted? How long after that was he fired?
Well, it was a few months. It was a few months later. The reasons why employers oftentimes wait a little bit is because if they fire him right away, it's just all the more obvious.
In a complaint filed with the state, his client accuses the Me Too advocate of using vulgar language, discussing topics inappropriate for the workplace, and showing herself to be vindictive in nature. But Garcia's former chief of staff says the former staffer's complaints are totally false, telling the SAC-B the staffer was warned for not doing his job and fired when his work didn't improve. It's the second formal accusation filed against Garcia. Another former employee claims she groped him at a softball game.
So the assembly member, Cristina Garcia, who put in the California Condom Police bill, also had multiple sexual harassment charges against her over the years. Some of them by aides, people that actually work for her in her office. And one aide in particular said, well, I was with her and she wanted to play Spin the Bottle. And he's like, I don't want to play Spin the Bottle with you. You're my boss. And she's like, well, you're going to play Spin the Bottle whether you like it or not. And so he denied her access, to, I guess, what she wanted. And so as a result, I guess she put in the California Condom Police, It's like, it sure sounds like a hate crime to me by Cristina Garcia. And then another guy was like, well, I was with her at an event and I worked for her and she was groping me. I mean, so obviously this woman has some issues. Okay. And her issues, rather than being acted out in the bedroom, which would be the appropriate place between consenting adults, she's decided to act it out in the legislature. And so one way, I mean, the producer here, Christopher Hopkins, said, well, what about, women who are on birth control? I mean, what if this particular bill were used as a way of trying to extract money out of people? I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of things. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen. This stealthing thing doesn't happen, podcast listeners. What I'm saying is, and the reason we do the dumbest bill in America is because of the fact that there's too much legislation trying to basically dictate every single aspect of our lives. And in this case, there's no better example. Here's legislation trying to get into our bedroom and trying to dictate, excuse the term and the pun, trying to dictate exactly what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. And at the same time, criminalize activity where the state doesn't belong in that I'm sorry, it's not a place for the state. And this shows you too much legislation trying to dictate every single aspect of human existence. And that is precisely why we do the dumbest bill in America, because there are too many laws governing too many things, and they're taking away our freedoms. And by freedoms, I don't mean the freedom to take off your condom, right? That's not what I'm talking about, because that obviously is a freedom. That's between you and the person that you're with. Stay out of the bedroom, California. But Assembly member Christina Garcia, she gropes men. She wants to play spin the bottle. She wants to end tax on tampons. And now she wants the California condom police. And that's the dumbest bill in America. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.